Hello, we're talking today about DIY abortions. They're also sometimes called home abortions, telephone abortions, or pills by post abortions, but they're all much the same thing. What we're talking about is an abortion where somebody doesn't have to go to an abortion centre or their doctor or a hospital, the consultation and thereafter, during the abortion and any aftercare, it's all at home over the telephone. So this was brought in temporarily during the COVID lockdown so that pregnant women didn't actually have to go for a physical appointment. But there's a possibility, quite a strong possibility, of this becoming permanent. So the government are having a consultation and the general public have been encouraged to respond to this consultation. Now we have up until the 26th of February to respond to this consultation. And we want to encourage you watching this today, wherever you're from, to respond to this consultation. Now, you don't need to be a medical professional. I'm far from a medical professional and I'm responding to it. But we thought it might be helpful to talk to a few medical professionals to see their opinion on this and to see what their thoughts are about DIY abortions and some concerns they have surrounding this. So today we're going to be talking to Julia Gibbons. Julia is a midwife. She's been practicing for around 8 years. So welcome, Julia, and thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
I know some of you will know you're a familiar face from some work you've done with us before at March for Life, so it's great to see you back again. So we thought what might be helpful first, Julia, is just to talk about maybe what it's like for a woman being pregnant in lockdown. Is that any different from any other time? Is there anything more difficult or easier? What are the differences between being pregnant at this particular time for women?
Sure. What I've noticed is that I've noticed a general increase in anxiety in women. Obviously, it varies. The anxiety tends to be greater in women in their first pregnancy, partly because on top of the fact that they don't know what's going to happen anyway, also they have maybe preoccupation connected to the lockdown. And it's a bit less in maybe second-time mothers or onwards, but definitely I have noticed an increase in anxiety. And this anxiety has been slightly exacerbated by the fact that as midwives, we've been asked to limit our face-to-face consultation to as much as possible to the essential ones, which means that also women have been limited in their interaction with us. Of course, they can interact with us over the phone, but that's not the same thing as a face-to-face consultation. And so I think that the face-to-face interaction would have been a time in which they can be soothed in their anxiety. They can have some, and that's been denied to them for very good reason, obviously, because we were in the midst of a pandemic, and those consultations were deemed not particularly essential. But it's certainly something I wouldn't necessarily carry on any further than at the end of the pandemic.
So what you're saying then is even with women who've got planned, much wanted pregnancies with many of these women, that their anxieties are going to be much higher than usual.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the anxiety, so when a woman is pregnant, she feels very vulnerable. And when she's surrounded, and for example, in the pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs, or they were put in furlough, or their job was a little bit unsure. And if you're a pregnant woman, knowing that you yourself might be put on furlough, might lose your job, or your husband or your partner may lose your job, that will increase your natural level of anxiety connected to the pregnancy. And then there's also the worry about the virus itself. Although there is a lot of reassuring literature about coronavirus and the pregnancy, nevertheless, women are naturally very worried about it because they've been told they're vulnerable, they've been told they have to self-isolate, they have to avoid contact with other people, and therefore although they've been, from one hand they're told that they're vulnerable, from one hand they're told they're not, but it's very difficult. And yeah, that's why they're very, very anxious at the moment. Yes. And I've noticed also an increase in the complaints. A lot of women have complained we received a higher number of complaints to the trust, not to do with any a particular practice of a particular midwife or doctor. It was all to do with the reaction that the hospital had to the pandemic.
Right, yeah. And I presume, obviously, you know, pregnancy, it can be a very anxious time for women anyway, can't it? I mean, any of us women know that hormones can affect our moods, and obviously there's a lot of hormonal changes happening during the pregnancy, particularly maybe during the first stages of pregnancy. And this leads me on to think how a lot of people are saying it's such a plus that with a DIY or home abortion, things can be sped along quicker. But I presume if a woman is already feeling quite vulnerable, maybe a bit more anxious because of the hormonal changes, which have been exacerbated by this lockdown, actually the fact that things are quicker and sped along more isn't really a plus at all. That could be quite a negative point.
Yes, I think so. I definitely think so. I definitely think that when you have a telephone consultation, it generally far quicker than a face-to-face consultation. When you are in face-to-face consultation, you can pick up certain body language or certain reactions to what you said, which you cannot pick up over a telephone consultation. And you may just be tempted to conclude or arrive to the conclusion that the woman doesn't want to ask you anything else or doesn't want to say anything else, and conclude the consultation. Whereas it's likely that actually the woman wanted to speak about something else. And I would presume with women who are considering having an abortion, this would be even more because the state of mind they're in. They're not. They wouldn't be in a very happy and relaxed state of mind at all. So if that's as we said, if that's already limited and non-appropriate mean of consultation for somebody who's happy and in a very positive situation, such as, you know, pregnant and wanting to be pregnant, I can only imagine the whirlwind of emotions that's going on in someone who's actually considering an abortion.
Absolutely. And of course, when we talk about there not being any face-to-face consultations, it's not just before the abortion, but during the abortion, when the woman is having to self-administer the drugs. And of course, afterwards, there's nobody that she's physically going to go and talk to, no medical professional, you know, no counsellor. She's alone to deal with that as well, isn't it?
Yes. Well, something I was thinking about as well is when a woman is told, you know, I've looked into how the abortion pills actually work. Obviously, they have certain side effects, of which I'm sure women would be warned. But you'll never know how you will react to those side effects. You may, you know, the fact that you have nausea and vomiting could be something that you go through normally, or something that can give you even more anxiety. The fact that you feel, well, you know, I feel like this, I would like to talk to someone, I would like to attend something, but I was told over the phone that this is normal, and that almost makes you feel as if you are a little bit of a burden to the person you're phoning. And I see that in women. The women always think, oh, if I complain about this, or if I will be the burden, I will be the person who's a nuisance. And you know, that's the last thing you want women to feel when they're going through such a treatment, such a procedure, because if they are unwell, they need to contact someone. They need to be in touch with someone immediately, even if it's not a particularly severe thing, but they must be encouraged to be in touch. And I think the whole nature of the DIY abortion is to stay at home and remain at home and do everything at home. So women are not particularly encouraged. I don't want to say they're not encouraged to call, but equally psychologically they don't feel they can. I don't think they would feel they can, at least. Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually something else has occurred to me. I wonder if you'd mind talking into this. That obviously if a woman goes through with an abortion at home, there's going to be the trauma of not only of obviously of her seeing possibly the fetal remains, but then there's actually what happens to the fetal remains. Now, I know this is a very sensitive subject to be talking about, but it's actually a very real concern. I know there was a poll put out in Scotland, which was commissioned by SPUC, the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, but it was conducted by Savanta Comres, and a lot of Scottish adults responded to this poll, and there was quite a concern. I think it was 83% of Scottish adults were very concerned with how fetal remains would be disposed of during a home abortion. So of course, if an abortion takes place at a hospital or an abortion centre, they would have a set procedure for how to dispose of those remains. Now they're supposed to dispose of them with some kind of appropriate respect. Now, we could talk about the irony of that when they have helped facilitate the abortion, but that aside, that there is, of course, going to be a big difference when this is happening at home, and it's most likely that those fetal remains would probably be going down the toilet. Now, I know Dr. Callum McKellar, who is of the Scottish Council on the Human Bioethics. He spoke out actually against DIY abortions, and this was one of the reasons that he spoke out. He was very concerned about fetal remains going down toilets and women possibly seeing those fetal remains. And of course, we've got to look at the side of it that somebody may well end up seeing those. We've got, you know, possible blockages, people dealing with plumbing, ending up having to see fetal remains while they're doing that. So there's a lot of possible repercussions from having fetal remains going down a toilet rather than being disposed of in a hospital or an abortion facility. Would you think that's a consideration?
I think that's not an unreasonable concern at all. Quite the opposite. My experience with it, I drew this opinion from my experience in dealing with a very sad situation, which is when a natural intrauterine death, which is midwives we induce labor for. And one of the things that we do, the first thing we do, we ask the mother, even before we start all the procedure, we always ask them, would you like to see the baby when is delivered? And they have the choice to say yes or no. And the reason why we ask that is because we understand that not many women may want to see their child. As you know, it doesn't matter how much you may love your child, it might be a little bit of a traumatic sight. As midwives, it's traumatic for midwives as well, but we're being more used to it, and we wouldn't be doing this job if we were not. But we cannot expect anyone else, the common woman or man on the street, to be able to cope with this sight. And I wonder also, there isn't much knowledge about a baby at the gestational age that we're talking about in DIY abortion, which we're talking up to 10 weeks. A baby at 10 weeks is pretty much recognizable, and I don't think many women are aware of that. And why should they, really? So they might not be expecting that. And even if they were to expect it, it could still be a traumatic sight. You never know how you're going to react. And actually, I had not thought about people be more distant from the woman. For example, people dealing in the plumbing that might come across it, as with the risk of the remains going down the toilet and things like that. But definitely, that's not an unreasonable concern at all. No.
So what sort of size would we be talking about for a fetus of 10 weeks gestation?
I believe we're talking about an inch and a half, an inch and a half, which is about 5 centimeters. So it's recognizable, and it's if you were to go for a scan at that gestational age, you could actually see the shape of your baby with legs and arms, and that would be definitely visible at home.
So yeah, like you were saying, I think this is something that a lot of women would be unaware of, or even if they might know, they might have blocked it out of their minds if they're going to be having an abortion. But that's going to be very hard to do if you're actually confronted with that sight yourself.
Yes.
And of course, like we were saying, other people possibly inadvertently
absolutely
doing
that.
Yes. And also, you know, just the practical problem of possible blockages and things being caused by, you know, extra fetal remains, you know,
absolutely.
And the disrespect afforded to that human being, whatever stage they are at.
And I think there's also an element of healing when following a loss of a baby, which having the remains and being aware that the remains have been disposed of with dignity and in a suitable way can give a lot of can aid the healing of a woman who's gone through a loss. In fact, this is one of the problem with any other kind of abortion, that kind of healing doesn't happen. But this is going to be even worse in DIY abortion, because not only they won't be able to dispose of it appropriately, they will actually witness it not being disposed appropriately. And that will just increase the anxiety and the sadness and the trauma linked to the experience.
And of course, these things that we're talking about, all of this is something which potentially a woman might have to be going through completely by herself, or trying to keep it secret, possibly from people that she's living with, because of the nature of abortion. A lot of people will keep that very private. So all of these things could have an added effect on her mental or emotional, psychological health.
Yes, absolutely,
because the trauma isn't shared with anybody, you know.
No, exactly.
Consultant, possibly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really helpful then, Julia, to see that it's not, you know, aside of our views, whether we believe in abortion or we don't believe in abortion, if we're actually really caring about women's health, then there's a specific concern about these DIY home abortions, maybe particularly about the emotional and mental well-being of women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mental effect that home abortion can have on them.
No, absolutely. It's just also, I think, in talking through the abortion, I think a woman that phones, there's more to the surface to a woman that calls an abortion provider and asks for an abortion, and the fact, and I think it's difficult for the abortion provider to go through in depth with a woman, with dealing with a woman face to face, and that even that possibility of dealing with it in depth and maybe give the possibility to the woman to change her mind, it's practically and virtually annulled in a telephone consultation. And as we said in the last 10-15 minutes, the fact that you cannot really voice your concern as thoroughly and as effectively as you would if you were to have a face-to-face consultation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia, for being with us today. Those, I think, are really valuable points to consider when we're filling out these consultation forms. So I really want to urge people to do that before the 26th of February. They're simple forms to fill out. There's only a few questions. If there's anything you can't answer, leave it, but at least fill out the forms to voice the concerns that you do have about these DIY home abortions and the possibility of them becoming permanent.
Absolutely. It takes 40 to 45 minutes to fill it in. It's actually quite easy to fill in, and they actually encourage also people to give their own opinion about it. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and as we've said right at the beginning, you don't need to be a medical professional yourself to voice your concerns. Anyone is entitled to fill these forms in. And I think particularly those of us who've got pro-life beliefs, we've got a certain duty, while we can actually do something about this, to fill the forms in and let our voices be heard. So thanks ever so much for joining us today, Julia. Bye-bye.
You're very welcome, Isabel. Bye-bye.
Bye.